With smart looks, a practical interior, great build quality and solid engineering, Kia's third generation Carens is a much improved 7-seat compact MPV. Though well appointed, it offers strong value and efficient running costs. In other words, you get pretty much everything families are looking for in this segment. With this car, the modern era rejuvenation of Kia's model range is complete.
Look at what most growing families actually need, and this is it. A compactly proportioned 7-seat MPV. Look though at what most growing families actually want, and a people carrier of this kind with a Kia badge on the bonnet has rarely been top of their shopping lists. If this South Korean maker is to continue its ambitious rise in sales, it's time for that to change. With this car, the third generation Carens. In many ways, the Kia brand has been built on MPV motoring, and for years its large Sedona model was its best seller here. By the turn of the century, though, it was clear that people carrying segment growth lay in smaller designs, a market targeted with the original Carens model of 2000. This was the kind of car Kia used to make, cheap, practical and very dull. Signs that the brand could do better arrived with its 2006 replacement, but that was still an MPV you bought on sticker price, not necessarily because you really wanted one. Kia, though, has no room for such cars in its model lineup anymore, and accordingly this third generation Carens needed to offer a big step forward with desirable styling, impressive quality and high-tech engine wear. It needed to be practical too, given that the deletion of the big Sedona MPV from Kia's model lineup meant that going forward, this would be the only family-sized people carrier the brand would offer. Hence the fact that for the first time, this car is being offered only with 7 seats. So, can it deliver? Let's find out. Kia was keen that this third generation Carens should be far more class competitive in terms of its on-the-road driving experience. But it was also mindful of how low a priority this is for most potential buyers. Cars of this kind are usually seen as functional items with comfort and composure, greater priorities than power and dynamic response. So a compromise was reached during development. Nothing too dramatic has been done to either ride or handling, but a much stiffer body, a fancy flex steer variable weight steering and a range of more willing engines, all aimed to keep your interest once you drop the kids off at school. To be honest, I don't think any of these things will keep your interest for very long. Like most of its rivals, this isn't really that kind of car. Still, it is, as promised, a useful step forward from its predecessor, with a firmer setup that deliberately distances this Kia from softer sprung but more roll-sensitive rivals like Citroen's Grand C4 Picasso and Renault's Grand Scenic. Not that you should get me wrong here. If you're running late for the school play and throw the thing hard into a bend, well, you get plenty more body roll than you would in, say, a rival Ford Grand C-Max or even a Peugeot 5008. But in normal day-to-day motoring, most families should be quite happy with the ride and handling compromise that's been reached here. Though the 6-speed manual gearbox isn't the slickest, the steering's nicely direct, even if it doesn't offer a great deal of feedback. But in all Carens models, you can try and do something about that thanks to the standard inclusion of Kia's Flex Steer system, operable via this button here. It offers the driver a choice of normal, comfort or sport steering modes, something fun to experiment with for the first few miles, but ultimately not much use given that comfort is rather too light and sport a bit too heavy. Under the bonnet, buyers get to choose between a 133 brake horsepower 1.6 litre GDI petrol unit or a 1.7 litre CRDI turbo diesel, offered in 114 or 134 brake horsepower states of tune, the latter available with the option of a 6-speed auto gearbox. Most will be choosing between the GDI petrol unit or the lower powered diesel, both capable of around 112 miles an hour flat out. On paper, the diesel gets there in a more leisurely fashion, the 0 to 62 mile an hour sprint taking 12.6 seconds as opposed to 10.9 seconds. But in practice, the CRDI model's greater reserves of torque, there's 95 newton meters more of it, make it feel a more willing companion. The diesel's heavier engine also puts a bit more weight over the front wheels, which makes the car feel slightly more positive when cornering. And the best engine you could choose? Well, it's probably the one that, thanks to high pricing, hardly any UK customers will buy. The 1.7 litre CRDI diesel in its pokiest 134 brake horsepower state of tune. Go for such a variant, and as with the lower powered unit I'm driving here, you have to be up around 1500 RPM before the grunt really propels you forward. But once it does, the extra torque, up from 260 to 330 newton meters, is quite noticeable, to the point where it'd be a real boon if you were regularly using the car heavy laden or on longer trips. Kia reckons that this is the most stylish car in its sector, a bold claim in a segment boasting some distinctive looking rivals. The extent to which you'll agree will probably depend a little on the spec of the car you're looking at. Plusher versions can certainly look quite desirable. All models, of course, get the brand's now familiar family front end with its sharply contoured lines, LED daytime running lights and chrome-edged tiger nose front grille. Three-dimensional side surfaces continue the more dynamic look, with concave sections that start on the lower edge of the front doors before gently rising to the trailing edge of the rear doors. At the rear, where split horizontal rear combination lights make loading easier, you'll find a wider tailgate and window with an integral rear spoiler and a hidden frame design for the glass for added practicality. Overall, we're talking a clean, effective and, in its own way, very clever piece of design, given its provision of extra cabin space, despite the fact that this Mark III Carens is fully 20mm shorter, 15mm narrower and 45mm lower than the car it replaces. This has been achieved thanks to a wheelbase that, courtesy of a 50mm increase, is now virtually as big as that of a much pricier Vauxhall Zafira Tourer, which most would see as a slightly larger car. Bear in mind, by the way, that Carens buyers only get that one wheelbase, that one body size. Unlike Ford, Citroën and Renault, Kia doesn't see the need to offer separate 5- and 7-seat body shapes in this segment. It never did previously either, but older Carens models offered the choice of either 5 or 7 seats. Here you've got a 7-seat only design. Of course, it's one thing cramming 3 rows of seating into a car as relatively compact as this one. The 4.5 metre length isn't much greater than that of a Focus hatchback. Quite another for the rearmost pews to be actually properly usable. Are they here? Well, I don't want to get your hopes up too high on this score. No compact MPV in this class has yet delivered third row seating that's properly comfortable for adults on long journeys, and this one doesn't either. But seating at the very back is at least now easier to access, thanks to a more effective middle row tilting and sliding mechanism. Use it to get yourself into these chairs and you'll find standards of head and shoulder room pretty similar to those offered by obvious rivals. In other words, if you're an adult, there isn't much, but a couple of kids will probably be just fine. Legroom, of course, will be the biggest third row restriction, but thanks to the way that the middle seating row slides backwards and forwards, with a little cooperation from those in front, it should be possible for most to get reasonably comfortable. And what of the middle row? Well, if you own the previous generation version of this car, the first thing you notice is that it's much more flexible, made up of these 3 separate reclining and sliding chairs rather than a simple bench. That's made it much easier to properly accommodate 3 passengers, something that would have been a bit of a squash before. Now, if you're only transporting 2 people, then the middle seat can be folded forward to create a useful table. You also get a couple of useful recessed underfloor storage compartments to deal with the kids' paraphernalia or keep valuables away from prying eyes. Plus, most models get neat fold-out seat-back tables. Up front, you view a clearly presented set of instruments through a smart, leather-trimmed three-spoke steering wheel with intuitive controls and faultless functionality that leaves everything exactly where you'd expect to find it. An approach continuing across a smartly styled dash split into an upper information zone dominated by this central screen and a lower control area where there are separate air conditioning buttons and rotary dials for driver and passenger. True, despite the shiny surfaces and chrome accents, the overall cabin quality isn't quite as classy or avant-garde as some rivals can manage, but you wouldn't feel shortchanged by it either. And it's practical too, with a spacious centre console box, a cooled glove box, and door pockets large enough to hold decently sized drinks bottles. Someone has thought very carefully about how this car will be used. Attention to detail you see in things like the butterfly action of the front wiper blades to ensure that they clear the edges of the screen on both sides, and the clean text fabric used on the seats to ensure that marks can be easily wiped off. And luggage space, well, as you would probably expect, with all three rows raised, there isn't much. Just 103 litres, but then that is 30% more than the previous version of this car could offer, and you do get a neat underfloor compartment that can be used to stow away the removable load cover. With heavier items, it'll also help that the loading lip is 15mm closer to the ground, while at night the portable LED luggage light that most variants include will come in very useful. Plus, there are the usual hooks, and most models have a luggage net to keep stuff like your shopping in place. Of course, most of the time, owners won't be using the third row seating, and with these two chairs folded into the floor, there's 492 litres of space on offer below the window line, 17.1 litres more than before. Push forward the second row and you get a usefully flat floor and up to 1,650 litres of total fresh air. Not quite as much as some rivals can offer, it's true, but enough for most people's needs, especially since the front passenger seat can be folded in half to accommodate long items like surfboards and bicycles. Now, the days are past when Kia sought to dramatically undercut its mainstream rivals on price, but that doesn't mean its much improved products can't still offer decent value for money. In contrast to previous generation versions of this car, this one comes only with 7 seats, priced in the £18,000 to £24,000 bracket, which on the face of things you might think would be typical of compact 7-seater MPVs in this segment. Most potential buyers will want to find the £1,400 premium to go from the entry-level 1.6 litre GDI petrol variant to the lower powered of the two 1.7 litre CRDI diesels. There'll be far fewer takers for the higher powered 1.7 litre CRDI variant, which is much pricier as it comes either in mid-spec automatic form or as a top-spec manual. As for rivals, well, let's start with a bit of perspective. If you want to regularly transport 7 adults, you don't buy a car like this in the first place, but consider a properly large MPV like a Ford Galaxy or a Volkswagen Charan. But most families only need the third seating row for kids or occasional use, and it's for them that the compact 7-seat MPV market mainly caters. Most cars of this kind are like this Kia, with third row seating space pretty restricted, just as you'd also find on key rivals like Ford's Grand C-Max, the Peugeot 5008, the Volkswagen Touran and the Toyota Verso. Up-spec, more powerful versions of all these contenders also aim to snare customers who might be looking at the slightly larger, more sophisticated designs you'll find at the top of this segment, cars like the Ford S-Max and the Vauxhall Zafira Tourer. Alright, so much for the perspective. How exactly does this Kia stack up to its immediate rivals on price? Pretty well is the answer. The £18,000 asking figure for the entry-level petrol 1.6 is about the same as you pay for a comparable base petrol engine Toyota Verso or Chevrolet Orlando. All the other most obvious alternatives will cost you more, despite offering less power. So an equivalent Peugeot 5008 1.6 VTI is around £500 more, a Volkswagen Touran 1.2 TSI is about £1,300 more, and a comparably performing Ford Grand C-Max 1 litre T EcoBoost 125 PS over £2,500 more. So far so good, but most potential Carens customers will want to consider the diesel option. Again, Kia's pricing, with the 114 brake horsepower CR-Di engine I've been trying here at least, is very competitive. Of all the obvious 7-seat MPV rivals in this sector, only Toyota's Verso 2-litre D4D can join this Kia in giving you some decent change from £20,000. You'll need to find another £800 on top of a price of a base diesel Carens if you want a comparable Peugeot 5008 1.6 HDI, and £1,300 to £1,500 more for base diesel versions of cars like the Chevrolet Orlando or the Volkswagen Touran. Make that a couple of £1,000 more if you're looking at the least expensive diesel versions of rivals like the Ford Grand C-Max or the Mazda 5. Go for a pokier diesel-powered Carens model and the value proposition diminishes considerably. When it comes to the 134 brake horsepower 1.7 litre CR-Di unit, there's an automatic mid-spec version for around £22,000 and a manual top-spec model with all the bells and whistles for around £24,000. But get into spending that kind of money and you could have got yourself a slightly larger and more sophisticated family MPV, say a Ford S-Max or a Vauxhall Zafira Tourer. No, the value really lies in the lower reaches of the Carens lineup. Let's assume you've taken this on board and agree that this car does, in all probability, represent the best all-round value proposition in its segment. So what exactly can you expect in terms of standard equipment from the 7-seat only lineup if you choose either the base petrol or diesel versions? Well, though Carens may translate as lacking in Latin, apart from the disappointing omission of roof rails and rear parking sensors on base variants, there isn't much missing from the standard spec, even at entry level. So across the range you can expect to find features like LED daytime running lights, cornering lights that illuminate your way around the bends, auto headlamps that stay on to see you to your front door at night, power mirrors, tinted glass, air conditioning with proper rear air ventilation, a cooled glove box, a useful rear conversation mirror that helps you keep an eye on the kids as you drive, a trip computer, Bluetooth with voice recognition, music streaming, cruise control with a speed limiter, and controls on a leather-covered steering wheel for a decent quality 6-speaker RDS radio CD player with iPod connectivity and MP3 compatibility. You also get variable weight flex steer steering and hill start assist to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. Safety-wise, this car was awarded a 5-star rating in NCAP tests, and you can see why. As well as twin front, side and curtain airbags, anti-whiplash head restraints and Isofix child seat fastenings, expect to find ESC electronic stability control and VSM vehicle stability management, the latter feature helping if, for example, you're in a situation where one side of the car has more grip than the other, say when you're driving near a grass verge. Plus, the anti-lock brakes have a brake assist function to help in emergency stops that'll be advertised to following motorists by an emergency stop signalling function that flashes the rear lights when you slam on the anchors. Compact MPVs are often bought by families who need to watch their pennies, and the Carens is no exception. Gone are the days when a low sticker price would more than mask the fact that the engines were a decade out of date. And if there's one thing that carbon dioxide-based taxation has done, it's driven manufacturers into a race to develop ever smarter and more efficient engines. Kia is no exception, and the latest clutch of power plants use what the brand calls eco-dynamics technology to deliver respectable numbers. Fuel-saving measures include ISG start-stop on all manual models to cut the engine when you don't need it, say stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights. There are also low rolling resistance tyres, electric power steering, a sleeker shape, and an alternator management system. As a result, the 1.6-litre GDI petrol model manages 44.1 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 149 grams per kilometre of CO2. The diesels, of course, can do much better than that. The 114 brake horsepower 1.7-litre CRDI diesel that I'm trying here manages 124 grams per kilometre of CO2 and 16.1 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle. Go for the minority interest 134 brake horsepower version of this engine and there's a marginal fall in those figures to 132 grams per kilometre and 56.4 miles to the gallon. But you take a much bigger hit if you opt for this pokier diesel with an auto gearbox. Here the figures fall to 46.3 miles to the gallon and 159 grams per kilometre. That's despite the provision of an active eco switch that, when activated, causes the transmission to upshift as early as possible and promotes a more economical driving style by delivering a softer accelerator response. Used values will continue to be propped up by Kia's excellent warranty arrangement, given that, unlike programs such as Vauxhall's lifetime warranty, it's fully transferable to second owners. It's worth pointing out, though, that the trumpeted 7-year, 100,000-mile package actually only covers the engine and gearbox. It's 100,000 miles and 5 years for everything else. Nevertheless, this promise of trouble-free motoring will be enough to tip the balance for many potential customers. Insurance groupings are also reasonable, rated between groups 12 and 16. This based on a low cost of repair and excellent safety provision. Servicing intervals are every 20,000 miles or 12 months, whichever comes sooner. And you can keep maintenance costs down by opting for either of Kia's Care 3 all-inclusive servicing programs that provide inflation-proof servicing costs for the first 3 or 5 years of the vehicle's life. The easy sell here will be to buyers of previous generation Carens models. This Mark III version is such a big step forward that Kia could justifiably have renamed it and started again. Buy one and you get the same strong build quality, reliability and long warranty you had before, but now wrapped up in a more effective, desirable and efficient package. Yes, also a pricier one, but the value proposition still remains strong in comparison with obvious rivals. Strong enough to deliver what Kia craves with this Mark III model, conquest buyers? Perhaps. You certainly get a lot more for your money here than rivals from brands like Ford, Renault and Citroën can offer. For the kind of cash you'd give to these makers for a 5-seat compact MPV, Kia provides a 7-seater design that's better equipped, just as efficient and, to some eyes at least, even arguably better looking. So, where does all that leave us? With, I think, a very appealing option in a family world that'll usually see a multitude of expenses take precedence over a plush people carrier. Food, clothing, heating, iPods, Sony PlayStations, cutting-edge Nike trainers, full suspension mountain bikes and so on. Once these essentials have been provided for your brood, there are often scant funds remaining for a vehicle to transport them between their football matches, dance classes, swimming lessons and youth clubs. What is a parent to do? Buy one of these? It's not hard to make a case for it.